and Copenhagen is hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference set to start on December the 7th. 192 nations are expected to send representatives for 2 weeks of talks aimed at creating a new global treaty on climate change. But there are some big unresolved issues. First, getting nations to agree to cut greenhouse gas emissions and getting rich nations to help poor nations reduce emissions. What will it cost? Some experts estimate fighting global warming could cost more than $100 billion a year. So how likely are the summit's chances of success? Well, the director of the Copenhagen Consensus Centre and a leading expert on environmental issues, Bjorn Lomborg, joins me now from Malmö in Sweden. He's being called one of the 50 people who could save the planet. Thank you, Bjorn, for joining us. We need to clarify exactly your position here, because you're not actually of the group that says we need to be addressing climate change as a priority, are you? Climate change as a priority.
Moving towards Copenhagen, saying we need to fix climate change. And yes, climate change is a problem, so we do need to address it. But the problem that I have with much of this hullabaloo is that it's focusing on the wrong ways to fix climate change. I mean, look, you just interviewed President Nasheed, and he tells you the science is obvious, that's true. But then he goes on to tell you the way to fix his problems is to let the resorts go green and put up a solar panel. No, I'm sorry, but the real solution, of course, is to make sure that the islands adapt, that they actually put in place very discrete, low-level levies. Those are the kinds of things that will very seriously save the Maldives. So it's much more about being smart on the certainly in the short run, and certainly if he wants to save his grandchildren.
But he said they're an optimistic nation, and they're optimistic that the world, by addressing climate change, can actually work together on this one. So he doesn't have to build the levees. Actually, he can resolve climate change by the world working together.
But this is one of the fundamental, you could almost call it one of the inconvenient truths. No matter what we do now, we will see sea levels rising. Now we'll see them rising, as it was mentioned in the discussion, at somewhere probably 30, 40 centimeters over the next 100 years. Now that's not the end of the world, but it's not trivial either for the Maldives. So they will have to build levees. But they also can. We know that if they don't, they will probably lose about 77% of their dry land area. But if they do, at a very, very low cost, they will lose virtually nothing. And remember, Max, and that's important to have in sort of our understanding of the past, over the last 150 years, sea levels rose about a foot, about 30 centimeters. And yet I would define that most people see that as one of the defining moments of history, not even at the Maldives. We adapted to this, and that's of course why it's crucial to have the Maldives take the right actions, adapt, rather than focusing first on putting up a solar panel.
The city in which you're based is hosting this crucial summit on climate change, isn't it? I get the. Yeah. Am I right in reading into the gist of your argument that actually the whole thing is pointless because you're not actually going to reach a deal, and even if you do, it's not going to make a big difference?
It's very, very true that we are very likely to not see a deal, as President Nasheed also alluded to. But I think it's a shame because we should get a deal. Now, if we're going to fix problems in the short run, if we're going to fix the problems for the Maldives and other places, we first need to focus on adaptation. We also do need to cut carbon emissions, but we got to be realistic. We got to fix that by doing two things. We have to focus on research and development on green energy technology, and we also got to start looking at geoengineering. I hosted something called the Copenhagen Consensus for Climate with some of the world's top economists, including 3 Nobel laureates, looking at where we can do the most good for the money that we spend, basically saying where can we do a lot of good for climate and where can we do very little for climate. What they basically told us was, if you spend money on just cutting carbon emissions now, it's fairly expensive and we don't really have the technology. You end up, you talked about $100 billion, but the economist actually pointed out that by the end of the century, we could end up paying $40 trillion a year, a totally unbelievable amount, to do fairly little good for the world. Whereas if we start investing in solar panels, making those cheaper, it'll be much, much easier to get everybody on board.
We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining.